everyone. Welcome to the Sprinklr Coffee Club. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Marshall Kirkpatrick. I'm your host here at the Sprinklr Coffee Club, and I hope you are ready to learn some things today, some exciting things about social media marketing, past, present, and future. I am really excited to have our special guest, Mr. Brian Fanzo. Brian is a keynote speaker, a consultant, a writer, a podcaster, and many more things. He is one of the most deliberate, thoughtful, and visionary people in the social media marketing world. You can learn about Brian at brianfanzo.com. And Brian, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Marshall. We go way back. So, and by way back, I mean pre-Sprinklr days, before that side of the house too. So congrats on it coming up on 3 years joining that team, and thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I am so happy here at Sprinklr and getting to have some of the smartest people in the industry come and spend 30 minutes chatting with me and the viewers here at Coffee Club is one of my favorite parts of my job. So we really appreciate everyone taking the time out of your day to join us live in this conversation or viewing it in recording. But if you are live, you have a special secret advantage. That's no secret. You can jump into the chat here in the live broadcast and ask questions of Brian and I, and we're pretty good about bringing your questions into the show. So please jump in and ask for clarification, take issue with things, ask for more information, whatever you see fit. And we hope that you will love this episode so much that you will like and subscribe to the Sprinklr channel here on YouTube and catch all of our shows and highlight reels. We're having a great time at the Coffee Club. So Brian, I am so glad to get as much as 30 minutes of your time today because you are a really, really thoughtful guy. You're so deliberate about how you do social media marketing. I feel like all of us can learn so much from you, be so inspired by you. Before I get into the specifics though, can I ask you for just an update on the Brian Fanzo empire and what you're up to these days?
Sure. I appreciate those kind words and excited to be here. So for me, I'm now full-time keynote speaker. So I speak about 60 events. I think it'll be 64 events this year. I have big goals next year of 100 events, really focused around, I'd say 4 key areas. It's, experience marketing, influencer marketing, video, and then I'd say my newer focus has been digital empathy, as you can see there at my website. I also host 3 podcasts. I love kind of living on the bleeding edge of technology. With my background, being in cybersecurity and then kind of moving into really digital marketing and that side of the house. I still focus on kind of like my 3 core values, which is collaboration, community, and change, which kind of fall nicely into all of these arenas. But it keeps me busy. I'm a dad of 3 girls. So when I'm not on the road, actually, as soon as we're recording this, my middle daughter has tennis practice tonight, so I'm heading over to watch that. And then I fly to Toronto, where I'll be speaking tomorrow on stage at Toronto. So I enjoy the hustle. I enjoy kind of the craziness, and it's my pleasure to be here for 30 minutes. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, that's great. Wonderful. Thank you. So, Brian, in a recent episode of the FOMO Fans podcast, which is a great listen, you went into depth not on any of these big picture issues that you talk about, but into your own business and how you do social media marketing to stir up business opportunities, which I know a lot of our viewers today are really interested in. And there was one line in particular I wanted to ask you to discuss and tell us more about, and that was a discussion that you started about getting people's attention and thinking ahead about what to do after you've gotten people's attention on social media. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I appreciate that episode has actually got some amazing buzz for people that have followed me for a while, but maybe thought, my mantra being press the damn button. Some people assume that I'm just spraying and praying. And I like to remind people, I'm a .com and I'm using social media to grow my business. And I'm very blessed, over well over 85% of my entire revenue is generated via social media. So as much as I love offline and speaking, everything does come to social media, but I look at each social network completely unique, right? So depending on the network itself, but when I'm thinking about we talk a lot about capturing attention, and I don't buy into the idea that today's audience has a short attention span, because we'll binge watch Netflix all day long. I listen to my favorite podcast right now is one by Dax Shepard called Armchair Expert. It's a 2-hour long podcast. I block off on my calendar. He interviews different celebrities, but he does it in such like an authentic, real way that it's just compelling. I mean, I block my calendar each week just to consume that one podcast. And so when we hear things about, short attention span, I think it's not short attention span, rather we have no time for crappy content. And so when I'm thinking about how I'm engaging, how I'm putting things out on social, especially knowing that I'm going to get someone's attention, I think is extremely important, but also knowing where they are, what they're currently doing, and then what my ultimate goal is. I like to say, before I do anything on social, it could be a single tweet, it could be, an elaborate blog post, maybe a video on LinkedIn. I like to think, okay, what does success look like for me on this video or on this piece of content? And then ultimately, what is my end goal? And sometimes the end goal is just to build trust. Sometimes it's just to convey, thought leadership. It doesn't have to be very, hey, I want this many views, or I want to drive this much traffic, but it can also be that. And so I think for me, I'm very strategic on that side of the fence, but I'm also one that leans into what works. I like to say I try just about everything, and I try to be open to the idea that saying, well, I'm trying this and I'm trying these 3 things, whichever one seems to work most for my goals or my vision of success, I'm going to double down on that. LinkedIn video, for example, when LinkedIn video came out, I was putting out some videos and I was like, you know what, I'm going to start to be consistent on it and I'm going to see how it goes. But I can tell you the LinkedIn videos at the time were very much a byproduct of the other videos I was doing on YouTube and Facebook Live. But I started to see some amazing traction on how people were commenting, what they were saying on these LinkedIn videos, to the point where I switched and I went LinkedIn videos as my #1 focus of content. And I started making videos specifically for LinkedIn. And part of that was just this idea of kind of leaning into what works, seeing the idea where, hey, this is where the current attention lives. And, and that goes to even things like, Instagram's the only channel that we can pretty much guarantee that 99% of your audience is viewing it on a mobile device. And so when we think about that, okay, now I know, and LinkedIn, for example, I know that, and I don't know this, like, let's say facts, but I believe a majority of people that I'm trying to reach on LinkedIn aren't logging in, but maybe once a day at most, probably once a week. And so I have push notifications on for LinkedIn. I want to know when someone comments, I want to reply in seconds. Someone comments on Instagram or Twitter, I know I can get back to it in 24 hours, but just knowing those type of things, it allows me to, understand how to prioritize the attention, right? I guess that's probably the best way of thinking of it. And I think everyone's audience is different, but that's really how I kind of wrap my head around, being strategic on social.
That's great. And how do you differentiate between your LinkedIn audience and Instagram, for example, or other social networks in terms of what kind of content you produce?
Sure. So I think that's one that, I think you have to kind of lean into the data and not be afraid to ask, right? So one of the things that I've realized over time is that, when the people that are following me on Instagram, they kind of come along on the journey with me. And so when I ask questions, maybe it's on an Instagram story where I'll say something like, did you guys listen to episode 112 of the podcast? And, I'll get some feedback directly. Now, if I ask that on LinkedIn, a lot of people would say, oh, you have a podcast. I didn't know that. Right. And so these are things that I like to test out there. And so when I look at those kind of audiences, I like to say, Instagram are the people that I'm turning from a fan into an advocate. LinkedIn is an audience where I'm trying to convey thought leadership to either reestablish maybe an existing relationship that, I've been noticing a lot of people from my past life when I worked in cybersecurity are now coming around and they're saying, hey, Brian, I want you to come speak my company. And a lot of that's because I'm kind of driving more thought leadership type content. But I think that that is definitely something to think about. I don't divide it as like professional versus personal. It's more of understanding how much of the content that audience consumes of mine, and then what layer they're looking for. And it even goes down to the call to actions. If on LinkedIn, you'll notice I will say in a LinkedIn piece of content, I will mention 2 or 3 times in a video that I am a keynote speaker and speaking is my full-time revenue. I don't mention that at all on Instagram, because if you're following me on Instagram, you're well aware of that. But if you're watching maybe your first video in 6 months of mine on LinkedIn, I try to reiterate some of the things that are those value propositions. And so it is, it's a conscious piece of it, but at the same time, I'm also willing to, I'll read the comments after a video and I'm like, wait, they were asking that on LinkedIn. That means my next LinkedIn video, I need to clarify that part of my background or clarify that part of what I said. And so I'm very much into using what the feedback I get immediately to drive kind of the next results for what I'm doing.
So you're doing a lot of professional networking on LinkedIn with people from throughout your career, but I know you're also doing some experiments with TikTok. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So I'm one that, I like to play on every social network so that I know what to expect or what I can advise for clients. I don't always recommend every client to get on every social network. I actually kind of shy away from that idea, but I'm also always trying to study where current attention is. And I always try to do it from more than one point of view. So not only from a business point of view, but why is there currently 800 million active users on TikTok? And this includes police officers, military, teachers, lawyers, that they're creating content on a regular basis. What about that platform inspires them to create there versus maybe Instagram or even Snapchat from the past days? And so I really try to look at the why. And I also, from a strategic perspective, I like to think about it and say, okay, if I need to build trust with a generation that currently doesn't know who I am, I need to be in it for the long haul. So I'm currently creating some content on TikTok. I'm not one that sings or lip syncs. I'm trying to get better at kind of understanding that medium. But for me, it's a long-term play. I thought, I was looking at my own business and I said, 5 years from now, I need to have Generation Z as my advocates to get me on stages, to get me, to buy my book at that point. And how do I get there? It's great to be able to wait 4 years and all of a sudden, kind of get there. Instead, I was like, I'm going to build trust by just creating some fun content, give people access to who I am. And over time, that trust is going to be built. And I like to think that trust is much, it's a stronger level of trust, but it's also for me to understand what works, why it works. I mean, I just did a video the other day. I was at the beach with my daughters and I got a lot of feedback on that video. And so I commented back, what did you like about this? Or how did you see this? And they're like, I loved your editing. Well, I didn't think of my editing as that great on there. And so I'm getting some feedback, and I can tell you, I'm taking that feedback on TikTok and I will be editing videos differently on LinkedIn or for my clients. I'm doing some work for Dell right now. And I'm going to be thinking about that it was a change of perspective where I took the camera from what I normally would to a different angle. And they said that kept them more engaged. Well, if it kept that younger generation more engaged, I'm willing to try it out there. So I'm always like to say, I focus on marketing where my audience is today, but I'm always listening for where they're going tomorrow.
Fantastic. That is a real natural segue into the next subject that I wanted to discuss with you, which is the future of marketing, the present as it rolls into the future. And one of the main things that you're talking about these days is empathy, and digital empathy in particular. What do you mean by that?
Sure. So, and it's definitely the thing that is my, I have a keynote program on it, and it's really my focus. And what I think it boils down to is that if we look at social media and technology, if we look at the current state of where we are at the moment, I think there's an element of people don't want to be marketed to, people don't want to be sold to. And we have the smartest consumers we've ever had in the history of time, as far as they can see through an ad. They know when your blog post is a white paper disguised as a blog post. They were really dialed in and connected. And it's interesting because I don't believe we're the hardest generation to reach, because we're more connected with our mobile devices than anything else. But I do look at it and say, how do we get that brand affinity? How do we build trust at a layer, a next layer down? And emotional marketing is nothing new. We've understood the value of using fear to get people to take action. Or, my podcast is called FOMO Fan, so the fear of missing out was a big piece there. But I think when we look down now and we start to kind of figure out where does social media, where does digital marketing fit in our entire business model, I think it's more about our ability to put ourselves in the shoes of our consumer. We've always screamed, especially as marketers, that we want to know more about our customers and we want to know what they like, where they like it, how they like it. Well, funny enough, we got the data, and all the tools that are serving us the data now are presenting it, but we kind of got a little scared because we're like, wait, they must be wrong, or that's the exception, not the rule. And I think now we have to kind of come back and say, okay, what is that data telling us? And then how do we kind of connect at a deeper level? And what I mean by that is not using empathy to market or sell, but rather being empathetic to understanding the pain points and how people interact, the time of day, and a lot of these characteristics that, you know, with artificial intelligence and some of those new technologies that are out there, there's so many different levels of us for us to understand our consumer. We just have to be open to doing that. And that's where I look at it. And I don't buy into the adage that we have to unplug to be more empathetic. I actually believe technology and social media, when we use it correctly, should be able to automate and scale some of the things that we spend too much time on today, so that we can spend more time being dialed in, having conversations, and really being more empathetic for those we're trying to reach, including our employees. I'm a big employee advocacy fan, and, you know, our current customers. And I would argue, you know, turning those current customers into fans and advocates with, you know, having that empathetic approach is probably more valuable than anything else we're doing today.
Would you say that it's fair to say that digital and digital empathy enables trust and relevance, and then as a result of trust and relevance, sales and revenue is a second order consequence?
Without question. And I would, you know, the old adage that people buy from people they like, that's nothing new. It still exists today. I think that the newest piece of this is people buy from those they can relate to. And we don't relate to a logo. We don't relate to a brand. We relate to people, and the people that are making up the brand, the stories of the brand. And so, I mean, a great example for me is Delta Airlines. Delta Airlines, I am a super fan of Delta Airlines. I have over 1 million miles with them. This year alone, I've hit 250,000 miles, which I'm not bragging about. That's a little bit too much airline miles. But I now have a rapport with their social customer service team on Twitter direct message, where when they message me, they know who I am, they know what I'm about, they know where I was my last trip, where I'm going my next trip. We have a rapport, even to the point where today they messaged me and said, hope you're feeling better. I know you weren't feeling too good on the plane earlier this week. And that level right there, not only does it, I mean, they're not paying me anything. I've never spoken at any of their events. I haven't done any work directly with Delta, but that layer of building that trust and relatability, I don't have to trust Delta, the airlines. I trust the customer service and support and customer experience team that I deal with on a regular basis. And that is plenty enough for me to spend more money with Delta than if I was taking another carrier. In the last year, I haven't even looked at another airline to buy a ticket for, because of that relatability that I have with that carrier. And so I think that's a perfect example of kind of, yes, we have to connect, we have to talk with, we have to build content. But if you do establish that trust and you become relatable, that's where, you know, you turn, you know, someone that you're selling into an upsell. You can turn that fan into an advocate and really spread that message wide. I mean, just in the last 2 months, I've taken 3 power users from different airlines, and they've now transferred their miles over to Delta. And the simple fact was, I was this much of a fan of what they were doing that they were like, I gotta get rid of American, I need to come over. And I think that's the perfect example of the sales cycle based on trust.
Fantastic. If you've got questions for Brian and you're watching live, please feel free to jump in and ask those questions, and we'll bring them into the conversation. Speaking of relatability, Brian, I want to talk about perhaps the risky side of that. And I've really appreciated some of your discussion about controversy and the potential in the future for matters of controversy and disagreement and divisiveness even to become a bigger and bigger part of the discourse that we're all out swimming in. Can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I think you can't really hide from the fact that, especially, here in the United States, as a country, we are very divided, and it doesn't matter who's elected next November or not. The polarizing aspect of where we currently are as a culture is going to divide, some businesses, some startups, some companies that have maybe had long time CFO, CEO relationships. And I think we're in this interesting time where we've needed that tipping point, little Malcolm Gladwell side of the house, to understand where we are, and things are kind of at a boiling point. But I also think it's a time for us to reset our expectations and really understand what matters most to us. I think in this world where we're living in right now, I believe, social media has allowed us to amplify things that have been going on for many, many, many years, which we've proven now. And we have two choices. People will blame social media or technology for making the world more disconnected. Or, in my opinion, the right way of this is understanding that the world has had bad things going on and there's been bad people doing bad things. Social media is now allowing us to bring light to that. And our choice is, can we as people become better? And then also kind of understanding that we are more alike than we are different. And at the same point that we're more alike than we are different, we have to also kind of have our own core values. There's, certain things that we will not, give in on. But at the same time, there might be things that we disagree with somebody, but we could probably work side by side with them because that disagreement is very small in our overall picture. And I think that's where I look at things especially in the political realm. It's never for me about one party versus another. Rather, what are the things within that spectrum that matter the most to me? And if those two or three things aren't things that we are strongly on opposite sides on, then we should be able to work together. And I think this is that it comes down to the basic principle of listening, right? Are we willing to listen to why and how things are going on? And social media, it can be the divider, or it can be the bringing together. And I think it's up to us to decide kind of how that goes. And I'm a big advocate for telling our story, putting ourselves out there. And by doing so, it kind of allows this whole thing come together. I like to say empathy starts with me, although it's backwards, EM, not ME. But, if we individually are able to put our vulnerabilities out there, tell our stories, talk about things that we're passionate about, it allows other people to be empathetic towards us. And it starts kind of like that chain reaction. But I'm without questioning, the next 13 months or so, we're going to live in times where we need to be better at compartmentalizing. We need to be better at listening. And we each individually have to make our decisions on how we're going to decide who we align with, who we don't. And I think it's going to be a very good lesson in how we move forward. But I do believe it's a tipping point that needs to happen, because I'm a firm believer that we're living in the greatest time in history. It's just a matter now of us, let's just say we have bad news and fake news. It's our job now to cut through that and amplify the good news that's happening around us. And if we do that, I firmly believe the world will be a better place. And it's a place that I want to raise my daughters in. But it's going to be interesting over the next 13, 14 months for sure.
Wow, there's a lot there. Okay, let me see if I can tease out some of the things, rich veins of thought you just articulated. First, I heard what people used to call sunlight as the best disinfectant, right? That there have always been bad things going on in the world, but when they get visibility, then we can do something about them. And what better source of sunlight is there than social media?
For sure.
And then the second thing I heard you say was that in these increasingly divisive times, it's important that we get some clarity for ourselves on what our real core values are that we're going to draw a line on. And on the other hand, what subjects we're able to agree to disagree about.
Yes.
And still work with people and collaborate.
Without question. I think that, if I had to give one piece of advice, especially for social media, it sounds kind of counterintuitive, it's self-awareness. And it's not self-awareness as in like, hey, I know who I am, my story, but it's taking a look in and saying who I am, what do I want to stand for? And for me, this is something I've been doing on a day-to-day basis, almost to the point where I'm even doing self-awareness where I'm tracking how many hours I spend doing certain tasks. I have a time-lapse camera that I run in my office just to see what I'm doing, where I'm spending my time, what things I care about. I watch a documentary and I even jot down in the documentary, okay, why did that make me have that feeling? What about that feeling and how is it presented to me in a way that I want to be able to understand myself? Because I do think in these divided times, it is important to put ourselves out there, but we can't really put ourselves out there until we first truly look at ourselves on how do people look at us today, and then how do we want to be looked upon. And I think that's it's a harder lesson to learn than I think I even realized over the last 3 years, but I believe it's essential. And I love the way you kind of wrap that up, because there is an element where, as things get exposed, we have to start asking ourselves, how do we as a society, how do we in our own day-to-day life do something different to make this change happen? Because it's amazing to say change the world, but that's the bigger picture. I think the bigger question becomes, what little changes can each one of us make that together changes the world, rather than looking for the one easy button that makes the ultimate change. Because I think that's kind of where we're at today.
Makes me think about Brene Brown's model that
yes.
Vulnerability is a prerequisite for trust.
I'm a huge Brene Brown fan.
So I'm hearing you say that self-reflection, even something like writing down your emotional reaction to something that you're doing and really paying attention to yourself, is the first step in being able to open up and be vulnerable with other people, which then allows you to build empathy and trust between people in order to collaborate in life and work.
Without question. And people have done business with people since day one, B2B, B2C. And yes, the sales cycles are different. Yes, maybe the funnel looks a little bit different, but there is some core values there that are fundamental. And I think today, my dad, I give a lot of credit to my dad. I was that millennial that my dad was telling me things 10, 15 years ago. And I was like, Dad, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, that was your business and your time. And he would tell me about handshakes are the most important and your reputation matters the most. And you have to have something that you believe in. And now, funny enough, I have to come full circle and say, Dad, you were right this whole time, that digital and social media didn't make any of these things different. It gives us an opportunity to even make a bigger impact. But ultimately, it comes back to those core fundamental aspects, of the human condition that we've always wanted. We want people to remember us. We want to know that we're making a difference in the world. We want to know that the people we are working with aren't working against us in our greater vision and things that we're doing. And so I think it's exciting because we're coming full circle. I think for the last 9 or 10 years, we've used social media to distance ourselves from our customers. And I believe the next 9 or 10 years, we'll be using social media to shrink the distance between ourselves and those customers. And I think that's where the true power of social comes in.
Fantastic. We've got a question hot in from the live audience. And here it is. Brian, do you think that most big brands see the value in listening to their customers on social, or are they still mostly broadcasting?
Ooh, that's a good one. I would say they're still mostly broadcasting, and the reason I say that is it's also when we're thinking about social listening and really the data that's coming in, I think one of the biggest issues is that the data is usually being siloed into the person. It's not being spread out to the right people. My job at the data center that I worked at before becoming an entrepreneur, I was a technology evangelist was my title, and it was my dream job. I modeled it after Guy Kawasaki and Apple, hence all the Apple things that are behind me here in the shot. But my job was to really bring the feedback from our customers into the different aspects of our team. And I remember sharing things with our product marketing team and our product developers, and then going and sitting with human resources and sharing some of this data, and them being blown away, saying that they've never heard it. Yet I had seen reports that were brought in through the sales team or through the marketing team for years prior to me giving that data. I wasn't telling them anything new. And I think social media is the same way, where oftentimes that feedback that we're getting in, the brand might be listening. I'm not going to say they're not listening. The question becomes, are they taking that data and getting it to the right people and then willing to take action? And the other piece of this that I think is scary for so many brands, and I was just on the phone with a brand yesterday on this exact concept, was you don't have to do everything on the feedback that you get from social media, but you do have to acknowledge the feedback that you're listening. And it's amazing for me how simple this task is. And I know, Marshall, you and I have agreed with this on for many years that we've known each other, is this idea that oftentimes people just want to be heard. They don't need all of their problems solved. But if they're tweeting at you, if they're commenting and they don't think that you're even listening, they don't even get like a favorite or, thank you for your feedback. It activates something to where they're going to get louder and more boisterous. And oftentimes, if you look at the underlying thing, it's like, I just want to know someone was listening. Thank you. I hope, if the feedback works, it does. If not, and you'd be amazed how that works. And so I do think there's a little bit too much broadcasting. I think that's partially because the data is not getting back to the right people. And then the last part of that is we want the people on our social media customer service teams, we want them to tell our story, be the very first touch point for our customers. We want them to understand the data. We want them to be able to triage, deal with crisis management. We want them to understand our vision, know what to say, what not to say. Yet we don't include them in the boardroom. We don't include them on product roadmaps. We don't include them on visions. And I think, how can they take this feedback and position it correctly for it to be consumed in the company if they're not part of that vision and part of that conversation? And so I think that's where, if you see the brands that are doing it well, you'll hear things like, oh, our CEO is checking into our Twitter account every day, right? Like, and I'm like, wow, well, because he or she understands that value. I got to be at an event just a couple of days ago with Beth Comstock from GE Days, and Beth told some amazing stories, and I've been blessed to be able to hang out with her a couple of times this year at different events. And she talked about how important it was for her to log in directly to these accounts and not just wait for a report to be sent to her, but to kind of look through and say, how are we replying? What are we saying? What is that direct feedback? What's the tone of the feedback? And she said oftentimes she won't even look at the report because of her understanding of that information. So I believe if you're willing to use tools and automation to kind of streamline some of these things, you can spend more time kind of dialing into that, listening to that feedback. And so, yes, there's too much broadcasting, but at the same time, I think it's just a matter of turning that listening into action.
Well said, well said. Brian, that is something that you and I and Sprinklr have been advocating for a decade. Forrester and Gartner both talk about social listening informing the whole enterprise. And I know when I talk to our customers now, more and more, it feels like the tide is really turning, and that it's happening.
It's
more
exciting.
And more.
That's exciting too, to see that. And also, I think it's a matter of, we've been craving this data and information. And then we originally got the information and was like, wow, that's not what we wanted to hear, or it's not like what we expected to hear. But now, because that customer is so, is not only so well informed, but customers right now are doing not only research, but they're listening to different layers of components. And I think for me, if I was looking at a company, and software companies are probably the biggest advocate of this, if I can trust the visionaries of the software company, I will buy into the software even if it's not working the best for me at that moment, because I know that they're understanding and taking me where it's going, versus the old school way of like, let's just throw some features out there. They might not work, but let's just throw them out there so that we can say that we have them. And I think that's a changing tide as well. And I think that goes into this idea where we're now sharing data across the board. And I love it. I get to do workshops for sales teams. And I've been working with a real estate titling company on using social video and just even doing video replies in their email. And the numbers are amazing. And the sales teams are coming back to me and saying, Brian, I'm now closing as if I'm shaking these people's hands or we're on the golf course. And to me, it's like, well, we've been telling you that for a long time. Now you're embracing it and understanding that power. So it's exciting to see that. And I think those with their head in the sand are those that will be out of business, sooner and later. So the trend is exciting to see, things becoming much more globally adopted and understanding the value of that feedback across an organization.
I agree. And I'm so glad that more and more organizations are coming in. The water's fine. And Brian, I really appreciate your sharing not just those long-held perspectives, but some of your newest thinking with us today about the future. I know that that our viewers have found it really, really valuable. And I'm looking forward to going back and reviewing this conversation, taking some notes, writing down how it made me feel and why, etc. So I feel a lot smarter as a result of this episode of the Sprinklr Coffee Club. Thank you, Brian, so much. I want to give you a last chance. Where can people go online to learn more about your work, Brian?
Sure. So on social, I'm iSocialFans, the name of my company, on every single social network. That's my website, isocialfans.com. So if you want to check out my blog, my podcast, I actually host 3 different podcasts that you can check out there on iSocialFans. And then my speaking website is actually a new website that I just launched called brianfanzo.com. You can see my current 4 programs that I'm booking out, speaking at a wide range of events, from healthcare to travel and tourism to enterprise technology, even to some layered influencer marketing in some of the regulated industries here in the U.S. government as well. So I appreciate you spending the time asking me to come on. And Marshall, you've always been a great leader. You listen and engage on channels at a very in-depth level. And every time you reply, I always know that you not only have you done your research, but it's very engaged, and it means a lot to me. So I appreciate you always leading the way and having me on the show.
Thanks, Brian. That's super kind of you. And thanks so much for the inspiration. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today at the Sprinklr Coffee Club. And extra big thanks to Brian Fanzo. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.